1. When I was around 18 or 19, me and a group of my female friends all drove to George, Washington for the Warped Tour at the Gorge Amphitheatre, which is pretty much in the middle of nowhere. After a very long and tiring but fun day, we piled into the car around 9 PM and headed back home. We were driving along the highway, which had no lights and was surrounded by forest on both sides. Eventually, a white car was quickly approaching our car from behind because they were speeding. We thought nothing of it, and the person who was driving our car got into the right lane to let them pass, which they did. Once around us, they stopped speeding and started doing the speed limit. None of us at that point thought anything was out of the ordinary. We were all pretty oblivious because we were talking to each other and having a nice time, until I randomly noticed that we didn't seem to be going as fast as we should have been. I looked to the front to check the speedometer and noticed that we were only doing about 45, which was 10 under. I then eyed the car in front of us and wondered out loud why they had been speeding, only to stop speeding and go under the speed limit once they were in front of another car. Everyone pretty much wrote it off as, yeah, haha, how dumb. We went back to talking for a few minutes, but then the person in front of us slowed down to 40, and then 35, at which point the person driving our car was getting irritated and said, "What the hell is this guy doing?" So, we were all, by that point, completely focused on the car, which then proceeded to slow down to 20, 15, 10, and then they just stopped, right there on the road. We were all pretty freaked out by this point, but still trying to be calm and rational. We started to wonder if something might be wrong, but we were doubtful, because we assumed that they most likely would have tried to pull over to the side of the road if that had been the case. From behind us, another car started approaching in the distance, and the car in front of us started to drive very quickly up to the speed limit, which is when we started getting really scared because it was too suspicious. The driver of our car tried, as the other car passed the front car, to stay behind the one that had just approached, but the car in front of us would not let us by, and was staying exactly even with our car. If we sped up or slowed down, so did they. Because of it, fearing an accident, our driver got too scared to try to switch lanes, and we backed off as the other car disappeared ahead of us. When we were alone with the original car, they once again stopped in the road. By this point, some of the people I was with started crying because we had no idea if this person or people were pranking us or if they were genuinely wanting to do something bad. One of my friends suggested that our driver speed around them, but I said not to because I was afraid that they were going to try to ram us off the road if we attempted it. The way I saw it, being behind them was the only advantage we had. Not one of us had cell phone reception either, which made all of us far too aware that it was truly like a scene straight out of a horror movie. We finally made the decision to do a U-turn with the person still just sitting there, so we sped off in the opposite direction as fast as we could. The first chance we got, we pulled over on the side of the road with our lights off, in one of those gravelly areas that a lot of semi-drivers rest in, so we could wait for another car to come by. Finally, after something like 20 minutes, we saw a semi coming down the highway. We pulled out in front of it and made sure there wasn't enough room between us and the semi for another car to get through. Sure enough, as we reached the spot we had been, the car was still in the same area, going under the speed limit. When they saw us and the semi, they started speeding again and disappeared ahead of us. I always think back on it wondering if we escaped something horrible or if it was just a group of people playing an extremely mean and terrifying prank. Number 2. This happened when I was a freshman in college and still living in my mum's house. There is a forest preserve a few miles from our house, so my mum and I decided to drive over and take the dogs for a long walk and enjoy the sunshine. The forest preserve has a path to follow for joggers, but also has a lot of open space, as well as hills, tall grass and trees, where it's possible to go off the path and walk in a more secluded area. Our dogs like to wander and aren't the friendliest with other dogs, so we usually go off the main walking trail to try and avoid other people. It was a nice summer day outside, and most people were sticking to the designated trail, so soon my mum and I were alone enjoying the peace and quiet. There was another man walking his large husky off the path too, but we tried to keep our distance from him because of his dog. My mum and I were talking when we heard a rustling sound a ways to the side of the path in the tall grass. I'm holding one dog and she's holding the other, and we tried to put in the retractable leashes to keep them closer, just in case there is an animal. We keep walking, when one of the dogs lets out a growl, as there is more rustling sounds coming from the tall grass. All of a sudden, the man with the husky starts shouting a ways behind us and coming towards us quickly, waving his arms and pointing into the grass. My mum and I are startled by this man and on our guard, but all of a sudden, two males by the looks of their size wearing grass suits start running in the opposite direction away from us and the man with the husky towards the trees. Needless to say, they scared the living shit out of us, and when husky guy caught up to us, I took the dogs away to distract them while my mum spoke to the guy. She said that he saw them sneaking into the tall grass and trying to camouflage themselves. He also told us that some unfriendly homeless people live in the forest, and it's not the safest place to be alone as two females. My mum then thanked him for getting our attention, and we ran back to our car pretty quickly. We didn't report what happened as the two guys never harmed us, but we never went back. I just have to wonder why they were camouflaged like that, in a public forest preserve of all places. I am thankful husky guys saw what they were up to, as I don't know what their intentions could have been. Here is a picture of what the suits look like. Number 3. Hello everyone. I'm currently a 20-year-old female and a pre-med student wannabe author. I know this is long and has a lot of setup and backstory, but I think it's important for understanding what happened. Please be with me. To get a full grasp on what happened to me, you will need some information about the setting that it took place in and the situation. When I was in about 2nd grade, I went to an old, pretty poor school in northern Illinois that had a gigantic wooden playground built before it lost most of its funding. You know the types of playgrounds that make white suburban soccer mums go into conniptions with its exposed wood, ripe with splinters, thousands of wasp nests, tiny hidden areas underneath the main scaffolding, and rusty nails and chains galore. Needless to say, we kids loved it, and even the high schoolers would come and play on the massive structure when the little ones weren't there. There were always kids of all ages there at all times. What made this playground even better was a large, thick-headed area that the local kids collectively called the brush. It was an expanse of low, dense shrubbery that had grown into an unimaginable bramble that instantly swallowed anyone who was able to crawl inside. We kids loved it, and over the years, a maze of little hobbit-sized trails had been worn into the brush, from children crawling in and out and breaking off branches to create miniature clearings and alcoves to hold secret club meetings and play jungle. The brush was absolutely impenetrable to all but the most determined and flexible of adults, which made us kids feel like big shit when we managed to sneak past the recess aides and dive into the brush. Unfortunately for the rookie teachers and aides, they were usually the ones sentenced to go fetch little pricks like us when we snuck in and refused to come out. At the time, I thought the only reason the adults were so determined to keep us out of the brush was simply the fact that we would hide in there and sneak around. I was too young to understand what the weird plunger things and white floppy tubes were at the deepest part of the brush. I soon found out, however, that syringes and condoms weren't the only things I should have been afraid of. Now, even more backstory. In 2nd grade, I was lucky enough to live right across the street from the big wooden playground and the thicket. Our house was an ugly brown 2-story with a small lawn. At the front of the lawn, we had a tree that I climbed all the time, and a tire swing that I played on constantly. Our neighborhood was full of old people and young families, so it was very quiet. So, during the summer months, my mum and dad would take the dog, as well as my little brother and I, on walks around the neighborhood after dinner, probably to tire us out so we could go the fuck to sleep. On the last 2 blocks of our circuit around the neighborhood, I would always ask my mum and dad if I could go run ahead and play on the tire swing while they slowly strolled around the corner and made their way back. They usually agreed to this, only if they could see me in the yard from where they were walking, and I would sprint down the road as fast as my shrimpy little legs could carry me, and play on the swing for about 5 to 10 minutes until they made it up the driveway and to the front door. One day, I must have been extra hyper and obnoxious when I asked my parents to let me run ahead and play on the swing. Even though we had gone much further than usual, they let me go ahead. As we were behind the corner we would turn to go down our street, I cut across a couple neighbours' lawns to get to our front yard, and started playing away. I hadn't been in our front yard very long when I heard a man's voice call out,
"Hey! Hey!"
a couple times. I looked over to see a man in a white shirt and cargo pants in the front edge of the brush. He was still behind some of the shorter shrubs and had obviously popped out of the thicket. I wasn't used to grown-ass men trying to talk to me, and paused on the swing and looked at him, pretty confused.
"Hey!"
he said, looking up and down the street.
"Hey, do you want to come play with me?"
He didn't come closer, staying behind the small shrubs, and his shoulders were hunched in a way that made it look like he was trying to fold in on himself. Now, I was a pretty stupid little kid, but stranger danger was being pushed pretty damn hard in the schools and the community at the time, so even I knew this behavior was absolutely inappropriate and weird for someone who appeared to be 30 and hiding in the bushes in front of my house. Nevertheless, I tried to be polite and called back to the stranger. "No thank you, I'm okay." I had stopped playing at this point and stood on top of the tire swing, staring at the man who hadn't budged. I was a very sociable kid. I liked people. I was known for running up to people that I didn't know and striking up conversations with them. However, something about this guy made me uneasy. I was only 8, but this was the first time that a man made me feel scared, for a reason that I wouldn't have words for until I was much older. I didn't want to go near him. I didn't want him to see me, and I wanted my family to hurry up and come home. But they were still about a block from turning the corner to our street. The man shuffled behind the shrubs and looked behind him and to the left, then turned back to me.
"Please,"
he begged, balling his hands up and putting them to his chest in a bastardization of what young toddlers do when they don't get their way.
"Please, come over here and play. We'll have a lot of fun."
He looked fitfully up and down the street as soon as he finished saying this, moving jerkily and visibly more nervous. I had enough, and my stranger danger sirens were blaring at full blast. Our house was locked up since we were out, and I couldn't get inside. I remember a distinct feeling of wanting to be out of reach, not just further away. I wanted to be somewhere where this man couldn't get to me, no matter how hard he tried. Without any more hesitation, I scrambled up the knotted rope of the tire swing up into the tree. Once I reached the first branch, I called out to the man and said, "My mum and dad say I can't play with strangers. I'm sorry." Then scrambled up a couple more branches. "Besides, they're coming home soon, and I have to go to bed." The man became more fidgety.
"Where are your mommy and daddy?"
he said.
"It's okay to come play for just a little bit."
I didn't answer, concentrating on climbing higher. I was now at a pretty significant height in the tree, and at a level where the branches would have snapped under anything heavier than a tiny 8-year-old girl. I looked back at the man, now at a vantage point where I had a bird's eye view of him and his surroundings, and saw something that made me go into silent hysterics. Behind the man in white was another man. They were about the same age, but this man was dressed in a khaki green shirt and brown pants and crouched behind the same bush that the man in white had popped out from, only now visible from my vantage point. I remember the scene so clearly. The man in green was in a stance like a footballer ready to tackle, or a baseball player ready to catch a low ball. But what made me so completely frightened was the fact that he was holding a large cream-colored pillowcase with both hands. I knew these were bad men, and they wanted to take me away from my family and home. I was so close to screaming, crying meltdown, and told the man in white again that I wasn't going to play with him. I remember my throat was tight and I was looking around for any adults that I knew in hopes that I could tell them what was happening. To my absolute relief, I saw my mum, dad, little brother and our pitbull mix round the corner and begin to head down our street, right towards me and the creeps. I pointed with my skinny pasty little arms and began telling the man in white that my family was coming now, right now, and that we were going to go inside. The man didn't believe me, and continued to try to coerce me to come down and play in the same way that he had before, only with more looking behind and to the side at the crouching man. Finally, the man in white spotted my family about 3 blocks away and jumped, obviously kicking into panic mode.
"Please, you have to come here,"
he begged, taking half a step forward in the brush. The crouching man said something that made the man in white stop, and he looked desperately back at me. They both looked at my approaching family, then silently ducked into the bushes, clambering into the thicket where I couldn't see them anymore. When my parents were close enough, I clambered down and immediately tried to tell them what happened. Unfortunately though, since I was a little bitty thing, I have the weird reaction of hysterically giggling and laughing when I'm scared out of my freaking mind. It's an absolutely horrible reflex and makes me look like a psycho to this day. Since I was laughing like a crazy person and jumping around with nervous energy, my parents assumed my story was some sort of a weird story about an imaginary friend. I had a lot of those, or I was talking about a cartoon I saw earlier. I tried insisting that it was real that night and the next day, but my parents refused to believe me and told me to hush or I'd get in trouble. My parents rarely believed me when I told them things, and still don't to this day. I put the incident away in my mind from that point on and never saw the two men again, nor heard about them anymore. However, about 2 years later, the brush was torn up and the remnants were burnt to the ground by the school with no explanation given to us kids. My family moved away from that house when I was in 5th grade, then moved out of the States when I was in 7th. When I was 16 and our family was eating dinner together, something prompted me to tell the story again. My parents stopped eating and looked at each other in horror, and my mother quietly asked me if I was seriously telling the truth. I exasperatedly assured them that I was, and jokingly said that I was pretty close to ending up on a milk carton. I regret saying that, because I could see both my parents' faces turn white, and they realized fully how close they had come to losing their only daughter all those years ago. Number 4. My 3 friends and I were camping in the backcountry of Yellowstone National Park. We were about 12 miles down a good-sized path when we came upon a beautiful lake. It was crystal clear blue water, truly amazing. So, we decided to strip down to our boxers and go for a swim after our long hot hike. It was beginning to get dark and we kept swimming. We were going to set up camp by the lake and stay for the night. As we were swimming, my friend Ron was sure that he saw someone move along the bank out of the corner of his eye, but as he turned to look, there was nothing there. He told us he thought he had seen someone, but we stopped to look around for a few minutes and there was nothing to be seen. After a while, we got out of the water and set up camp. As the night approached, we ate some food and settled down to watch the night sky. After about half an hour, Ron got up on an elbow and asked us, "Did you hear that?" We did not hear anything, and we sat up peering into the night. "Wait, it sounds like a baby crying in the lake. You don't hear that?" At this point, we stood up and started walking towards the lakeside. Before we knew it, Ron had jumped into the water and began to swim with all of his clothes on. We ran to the edge of the water and called his name, but we didn't see him anymore. The water was still. Then, Ron jumped up from the water and screamed for help. We waded out and jumped in to get him. He was so scared he almost dragged us down, but luckily it was very close to the shallow edge of the lake. He was babbling on about something grabbing him from under the water. Something was pulling him down apparently. At this point, we were just ticked at Ron. We had not heard anything like a baby and wondered what had snapped in his head. He sat there kind of out of it for a while, and then slowly stood up and began to change into dry clothes. After he crawled into his tent and quickly went to sleep, my other friend and I just sat there really creeped out. After a few hours, we lay down as well and drifted off into sleep. Sometime in the evening, I woke up to hear rustling in the bushes, and when I got up, our bags had been opened and the food was thrown all over the ground. For me, this was it. Somebody was out there and was messing with us. So, I told the guys to get up and we walked next to the big campground on the trail. It took us all night, but there was no way I was staying anywhere near the lake, and we wanted to be closer to other people. Ron, however, did not remember going into the water, but we did notice claw marks on his leg when we looked at it in good light. It looked like 3 distinct scratches and red marks like a 3-fingered hand had grabbed him. This was the freakiest thing I have ever experienced.
Hey guys, it's the Grim Reader. So, thank you very much for listening to this video. If you enjoyed, why not check out my other videos by clicking on the links on the screen. Also, don't forget to like, subscribe and share. Thanks a lot for listening.